B-40 and B-41 and recoilless rifles could unleash their power, so the heavy weapons soldiers with B-guns and recoilless rifles had enough time and distance to advance and fire effectively at that time. The explosions of various B-rounds sounded so numerous the 82mm recoilless rifles did not even have time to set up tripods, which would be a hassle, but were fired from the shoulder in an applied manner. I must admit our heavy weapons soldiers fought just like it was the final battle. The brothers lashed out furiously at the enemy, regardless of whether the enemy in that position was still breathing or had already kicked the bucket. It felt like the brothers were pouring all the hatred from so long onto the enemy. The Pot troops were no pushovers either, having been cornered. They were resisting fiercely at that time. Us scouts also rushed in to fight along with the infantry, because once we had inhaled the smell of gunpowder, we got high on it and just surged forward to attack. When we maneuvered up to the railroad track, I ran past a mound of earth and saw the B-41 gunner, a soldier from the class of 77, from Hatuyen. He was an extremely super B-41 gunner of Company 7, who had once taught me how to use the B-gun back in Kampong Speu. At that time I saw him sitting with his head bowed down while the B-41 gun, with no ammo inside, was rolling to one side. He'd been hit in the forehead at the railroad location. The enemy had utilized the track, which was higher than the field level, to make very solid fortifications at a heavy machine gun bunker. There was a gun lying upside down along with several enemy bodies destroyed by a B-round. At that time we did not have time to stop, but had to continue maneuvering across the railroad track and started crossing the open clearing. This clearing was about 500 or 600 meters wide, leading to the forest edge. Suddenly, there was the sound of muzzle reports from 37mm artillery in the forest in front, firing toward us. The explosions of the shells were sharp as they hit the sugar palm roots behind us. The rounds just whizzed past our tails. By the second volley, we only heard the muzzle reports and immediately hit the ground. Only the heavy weapons soldiers carrying heavy loads suffered, as they could not lie down in time. But this second volley also just whizzed past behind us. If at that time there had been a competition for sprinting and hurdling, perhaps every single one of our officers and soldiers would have won a prize. When this volley stopped, we heard a rumbling sound on the right. Turning our heads to look, we saw on the open clearing to the left of Road 56 several armored vehicles along with an infantry formation spread out in a horizontal line. I did not know which unit they belonged to, attacking the forest edge in front. At that time I just wished there was a war correspondent traveling with us to film this scene. It would have been wonderful seeing the combination of armored vehicles and infantry, seeing their power. We saw a few more volleys of 37mm artillery, but this time it was unclear where the shells flew while we were sprinting, mouths and ears competing to breathe. Then we also made it to the forest edge. Bursts of AK and light machine gun fire were lashing into the forest. By this time the enemy resistance was weak. We flooded into the forest. The forest trees were low and sparse, not the dense tropical jungle type in this area. The enemy did not have fortifications. Many enemy bodies lay scattered by the tree stumps, but we did not know how many. Even at the railroad track we did not know how many guys we had killed, as for our wounded and martyrs, the transport team took care of them. At that time we only knew to advance and advance. When crossing that narrow, sparse forest, we approached a crossroad on the right connecting to Road 56. On the road surface were still the imprints of artillery towing vehicles. Perhaps they had run into the forest. We were ordered to follow that road to Road 56 to join forces with the army wing currently advancing into Leech. Coming near Road 56, we were sitting to rest at bit to catch our breath when there were several hissing sounds over our heads from 105mm artillery shells. The explosions were far behind us. At that time we merged into the column of troops advancing to liberate Leech, the final lair of the genocidal regime on the road into it. Leech, the bridges had been destroyed by the Pot troops in front. There was a long convoy, including tanks, armored vehicles and artillery towing trucks, having to stop on the decks of the 37mm artillery trucks. The artillery soldiers were still holding their positions, ready to support the front. After weaving through the convoy, we continued to advance forward that afternoon. At about 5 p.m. we stopped to rest at a village by the side of Road 56 heading into Leech. This village did not have a single soul. Perhaps the enemy had herded all the civilians into the forest. The next morning we continued to march. When arriving at the entrance of Leech town, we turned left, continuing for about 2 or 3 kilometers into another village. In this village, perhaps there were more civilians because we saw many stilt houses at the end of the village, bordering the forest edge. There was a water dam with a sluice gate. Above the sluice gate was a very sturdy stilt house. We crossed to the other side of the dam and billeted there in this battle. Our regiment captured tanks. I do not remember which battalion it was. When we were sweeping in the Leash forest, we heard the sound of tank engines roaring deep in the forest. At that time we kept asking each other whose unit's tanks. They were later the officers told us that we had captured pot tanks, but they had paralyzed the machinery, so a battalion had to stay behind to protect the tanks, so technical soldiers could come in to repair them before bringing them out. Our unit captured quite a few trucks, including Chinese Liberation and Red River trucks. But the pot troops had slashed all the tires. Truly, they were spiteful. The trucks were brand new, so we had to burn them since we could not tow them out. About 1 or 2 days later, leaving only a small section behind, we continued to sweep widely around to ensure safety for the unit's billeting area, and also starting from here, we combined with infantry battalions for long days of sweeping the enemy in the dark, deep forests of the Leash Mountains. Although major battles no longer occurred, the blood of Vietnamese volunteer soldiers still had to be spilled on the long paths of sweeping the enemy, the vast Leash Mountains and forests, long days of marching and sweeping, to find enemy bases, and the notorious Butcher to mock marching days tired from the late season sun and severe water shortage. There were many times the brothers and I had to drink water from buffalo wallows with only a little liquid left in the mud. There were times when toadfish and mosquito larvae were still wriggling in our mouths as we swallowed the unforgettable jungle rains. So much blood and strength of Vietnamese volunteer soldiers had to be poured down in this vast mountain forest. I invite you and our comrades to march together. One day we led the brothers of Battalion 8 to sweep all morning deep in the forest without encountering a single enemy. That noon we stopped to rest at the foot of a mountain that was not too high. After finishing lunch, the unit continued on the road, this time having to cross the mountain to the other side. Going up the mountain, there was no path, and the mountain slope was steep. The vegetation on the slope was thick and dense with tangled vines, making it very miserable for the heavy weapons. Brothers panting for a long time, we finally reached the peak. Sitting to rest and observe at the foot of the mountain in front of us, we saw a village located in the middle of a clearing. Surrounding this clearing were forest edges wrapping around. In the middle of the village, we saw several rooftops and sugar palm trees. A bit further away, we saw a house that looked like a livestock farm. This village looked very large. We started to descend the mountain, but this time we had to maintain absolute secrecy. When nearly down to the foot of the mountain, the whole unit stopped to rest. We, along with the battalion scouts and a few officers, continued to move forward to probe, and we discovered additionally at the foot of the mountain, and right under the tree canopy, a row of stilt houses, about 14 or 15 of them stretching along the mountain foot. The houses faced the clearing, curving in a bow shape along the forest edge, about 300 to 400 meters from the houses in the middle of the clearing. At this time, the commanders turned back to the rear to formulate a combat plan while we lay there to monitor the enemy. At that time, we heard voices of men and women talking quite loudly and lively from the stilt houses, because behind the houses was an abandoned garden with only wild grass growing. We could not approach close to the houses yet, and did not know clearly if they were enemy or civilians, but at that time we still determined they were enemies, because the village looked very desolate. Then we saw a guy walking out from a house carrying a gun on his shoulder. Definitely the enemy, waiting for the battalion scouts to lead the infantry to lie in ambush, spread along the row of houses. Meanwhile, soldiers of the remaining companies divided into 2 wings, left and right, following the arc of the forest edge to tighten the siege on the enemy, but due to limited troop numbers, we could not cover everything, waiting for the signal from the communication radio to open fire at. This time inside the houses, the enemy was still talking and laughing loudly. They did not know their fate had already been sealed. The opening signal was a few B rounds launched into the houses. Mixed in was the sound of heavy machine guns whipping distinct bursts. The enemy was surprised and could not react in time. Mostly they were destroyed. Meanwhile, on the 2 wings, gunfire was also exploding rapidly. The 82mm and 60mm mortars started bombarding the houses in the middle of the village. Here, a few enemies escaped the mortar barrage and were trying to run for their lives into the forest. When the gunfire temporarily ceased, we went into the houses to look for antiques, but found nothing, only a few baskets and sets of black clothes, faded and dirty. In the next house, we saw 3 enemies, 1 dead, 1 wounded in the stomach, lying writhing. The remaining guy was trembling, mouthing continuously the phrase Chia Chuan, escorting this prisoner out of the house. We met a female pot soldier wounded in the abdomen, dying. Skipping a few stilt houses, we continued to advance into the village, passing a dense bush. We discovered several female pot soldiers hiding inside. Our soldiers stood outside, calling them to surrender, when suddenly a loud explosion rang. Out inside the bush, several enemy bodies fell down. They had committed suicide with grenades. We continued to develop into the middle of the village. Several houses had been hit by mortar shells and shattered, but in the stable we saw several horses still unharmed. This number of horses later served as food for us. On the sweeping march in this village, we captured several guns and a few spare magazines. As for the stick grenades that Brother P.4 aided the pot troops, there were plenty brand new. We did not dare take them to use, learning from the experience back in Kampong Speu, where one of our soldiers sacrificed because this type of devilish grenade from Brother P.4 self-destructed. Seeing the houses in the middle of the village shattered by mortar fire, we did not go in to see how many pot troops were killed. The immediate job was to catch the horses in the stable at all costs, otherwise the infantry companies would catch them. Oh, and we also saw a rudimentary bicycle, so the battalion transport guys did not miss it that night. We stopped to rest at the outer edge of the village. The next morning when we left that village heading west in a single file marching formation, the bicycle and horses were requisitioned to carry ammo and belongings for the transport soldiers. Looking at the marching formation, it felt somewhat chaotic. Somehow getting out of the village about 1 kilometer, we turned right to cross back over the mountain we just passed, but on a different path this time. The peak seemed higher than before. The horses carried loads well, but the transport guys strained their backs pushing the rudimentary bicycle with crates of ammo, hoping that over the mountain there would be a flat road. But the more we walked up, the higher it got, and the vegetation was tangled, unable to take it anymore. They had to abandon the bicycle halfway up the mountain and continued using their shoulders. It took until nearly noon for us to reach the mountain peak, stopping to rest a bit to regain strength to continue down the mountain. Looking down, we saw a vast, gloomy and quiet green color. The path down the mountain was somewhat easier because the slope on this side was gentle, and we just marched diagonally along the slope. Reaching the foot of the mountain, we encountered a dipterocarp forest. These dipterocarp forests had a characteristic that under the canopy was bamboo growing waist high, so it was easy to walk, continuing the march to hunt for enemy bases, but meeting not a single enemy soul on the way back to the unit that day. Just as we crossed a dry stream to the other bank, meeting an ox cart trail, we marched on that road heading toward the unit's billeting area when we unexpectedly encountered the enemy. There were only 3 of them walking in the opposite direction to us. The 2 sides bumped into each other so unexpectedly that we did not have time to open fire. They were quick to back into the forest. We only had time to fire a few AK bursts after them. They fired back one M79 round, but it exploded on the treetops, affecting no one, so determining this forest had enemies. The companies immediately deployed in a horizontal line, sweeping in the direction they had fled, but met no one. Not understanding where they had slipped away to that afternoon, we changed direction, circling back to that stream, but at a different location. Walking along, we heard whispering sounds down in the dry stream bed and detected a group of enemies bobbing up and down on the other bank, and almost at that very moment, the enemy detected us. They stood up to run, but it was too late. The AIKs and RPDs in the lead opened fire. 2 guys fell face down on the spot, while 1 guy ran back up the stream bank trying to run fast to escape the bullets. But he only ran about a dozen meters and then disappeared. Perhaps he had slipped away into the bamboo grass bushes. We tried to run a marathon with him, reaching that position, spreading out to search it. Turned out this guy was hit and severely wounded. Trying to crawl to hide, his M79 stock was shattered by a bullet during this time sweeping in this leech forest. We were very comfortable because there were almost no mines. The word mine only became an obsession for us later. When we went up to the San and Samout, marching and sweeping for several days, we were running out of food. The unit turned back to the billeting position to rest and prepare for the next missions. When we were marching back to the billeting position on a forestry exploitation road only about 4 kilometers from the unit, because we were nearing the unit, the soldiers were very excited, although still in formation. It was almost every man for himself, so friends gathered together, talking lively. Just passing a curve, we encountered the enemy again. There were about 10 of them walking in front, about 100 meters away in the same direction as us. I clearly saw the last guy looking back at us and then putting his head down to run. The guys in the lead and I, because of too much surprise, could not fire in time because almost everyone had their guns on their shoulders by the time we could shoot. They had run and disappeared. The war trophy we collected was a pot left lying lonely in the middle of the road. We did not bother racing them anymore, because honestly, comrades, in this regard, they were far better than us. They ran very fast, also adding a bit that the few horses we captured from the pot troops on the march had diminished, returning to the unit base. Only one remained. Having a few days of comfortable rest with Battalion 8, a few of us stayed with the Battalion 8 scouts in a house with walls plastered with mud. I was an old soldier of Battalion 8, so living with the brothers at the battalion headquarters was very comfortable, and also here the battalion 8 scouts and I stole several B-40 rockets that Ordnance had just received to go fishing along the stream, and almost got caught by the battalion officers. It happened that when going up for the briefing, old Shuyen Red Nose, a recruit from 74 from Thatch, seeing transport carrying back a batch of B-40 ammo, told us to steal a few rounds tonight to go fish, so we listened, and it sounded good that night. We executed exactly as the old guy incited until the next noon. A few of us took guns and the rockets following the stream to the rear of the Battalion 8 billeting area to fish, wasting several big B rounds, but only getting a few tiny minnows because of the explosions behind them. Billeting area, the officers sent battalion scouts and transport to check, and they caught the undisciplined guys at that time. They met us on the way back wearing only shorts and holding a string of minnows. That group of soldiers pretended not to see us because of the sweet tongue of old Chewy NGT. VITISDHLI 2NB KGBN sang Tining HVEITT CCC CCSA NY the NMC VDB and JA words THEOCHECAA NAGIM. Script translation numbers in words. One day our reconnaissance unit led the 5th Company to sweep an area in front of the position where the 8th Battalion was stationed. This was because there were 2 rather large cornfields in this area which the Pol Pot forces had almost finished harvesting. Now they still occasionally came back here to find some leftovers to stave off their lingering hunger. At that time we had already searched this area many times to help them with the harvest and to satisfy our own mouths, which were always bored when we weren't out sweeping. So we knew most of the positions quite well, like before we split into different groups to enter the cornfields. We were in the middle of the corn rows when we heard several shots ring out ahead, followed by the shouts of our own soldiers. Our group advanced while firing back to establish contact with our comrades, fearing we might accidentally engage our own forces. When we reached the area where the shots were fired, we saw that our troops had converged. 4 Pol Pot soldiers had been eliminated. The spoils of war collected were 2 AK rifles and a pot used for boiling corn. After settling things, we turned left and continued our sweep deeper inside. This path was an old logging road in the forest, used by the Cambodians, connecting to a few villages from further in. When we reached a wooden bridge that the enemy had destroyed, leaving only a gap wide enough for one person to pass, we met 4 children on this side of the bridge. The oldest one must have been about 12 or 13 years old, and the youngest about 3 or 4. They were sitting there, perhaps having come out of the jungle. They looked skinny, dilapidated, their clothes tattered and filthy, their pale eyes looking up at us, begging for help. We stopped, not knowing what to do other than take out our packed rice and give it to them. After feeding the children, we directed them on how to get out, as the 8th Battalion was stationed further down that main road. We, however, had to continue our mission. Continuing the sweep and an encounter after crossing the bridge and advancing for about more than 1 kilometer, we ran into the enemy again. At that moment, Theo, a soldier from the 78 intake from Haiphong who was in our 20th Company, was walking ahead. He spotted them and waved for the comrades behind to take cover on both sides of the road along the edge of the forest, and then move closer to open fire. However, the enemy also saw our rear element, and they started to crawl away. I then saw Theo leap out onto the road, leveling his RPD and spraying bullets forward. At the same time, Shuyen ran to the location of the 60mm mortar that had just been set up and dropped a few rounds in. We didn't know where the rounds went or where they exploded, only hearing the muffled sound of the explosions. The mortar operator then grumbled, telling him to stop firing because the rounds were going everywhere. He said he was just firing to scare them, and make them run as a direct hit was unlikely. I had to admit I couldn't argue with those veteran soldiers. The enemy didn't suffer any losses. They only left behind clear footprints in the sandy soil, one side wearing a sandal and the other side barefoot. Perhaps one of them had lost a sandal while running away. Advancing about 2 more kilometers, we reached the abandoned village from. This was also the last village marked for this sweep operation. The abandoned village, and a surprise upon entering the village, we saw a few mummified corpses on the stilt houses, and beneath the stilt houses, wherever the grass grew thick and green, there was almost certainly a dead body. We just fired a few rounds at the stilt houses, thinking there were no enemies inside. But when we looked out towards the field ahead, we saw 2 enemy soldiers running away head over heels. It was already close to the edge of the forest, so we just stopped and fired a few rounds in pursuit. Later, we named this village Phum Division 10 because a soldier from the 10th Division got lost here and encountered us while we were sweeping the area. I'll tell that story later. With the planned mission completed, we returned to our unit, fulfilling our assignment with the 8th Battalion. We returned to our unit to rest after many days of sweeping. Our 20th Company unit was stationed on a water dam bank. Right behind us was the sluice gate, and that's where the regimental headquarters' various offices were located. During this time, the units were preparing for a refresher course on reconnaissance skills. The reconnaissance personnel from the battalions also came to train with us. The main curriculum involved reading maps and determining coordinates interspersed with political education programs. Training a buffalo in a lesson after the training session, we divided into teams for field practice. One day my team went on a field trip in front of the company's position along the dam bank. In front of us was a swamp. We spotted a few guava trees and bamboo clumps. As the comrades were moving in to pick the guavas, a herd of enemy water buffalo suddenly bolted out of the water puddle near the swamp edge and ran away. We couldn't miss this opportunity. We immediately sprang into action and fired at the herd of buffalo. The last buffalo running was hit and stumbled, crying out as if calling for its comrades to help, but it was too late. Its 2 hind legs were immediately severed. At that moment, our soldiers only used AK bayonets and also had a few US-made bayonets, so the butchering was very quick. Those US bayonets were very sharp. We brought the enemy back to the unit's position whole and with no parts missing. Simply because, according to the field training plan, we went out in the morning and returned at noon, so none of us carried cooking pots like when we were on a campaign. If we had brought pots, I don't know how much would have been lost, stolen, or consumed immediately. So that day the entire unit had a satisfying feast of buffalo meat. The leftovers were boiled and dried to be eaten gradually or used to cook sour bamboo shoot soup. I should add a little side note: when we were in this swamp area, whenever we went out for field practice, we almost never forgot to bring the P.4 pot to catch fish for extra food. I remember one time we drained a deep puddle and caught a snakehead fish, also called CQ or CLC. I don't know how much it weighed because we didn't have a scale, but I only know that 2 guys carried it and its tail nearly touched the ground. During this time we studied and had a relatively comfortable life. Study time came to an end and it was time to return to the field. During this period we took turns, platoon by platoon, going to the front of the 8th Battalion's position to conduct field reconnaissance combined with enemy sweeping. Each time reconnaissance personnel from the other battalions joined us. More sweeping and the young prisoner continuing the days of sweeping, we followed the main road in front of the 5th Company's outpost. As we neared the destroyed bridge where we had previously met the Cambodian children, the children whom we had given rice to and directed towards the 8th Battalion's headquarters, but when we returned and asked, the soldiers said they hadn't seen them, so they must have gone back into the forest. Near the bridge that day, Thea was again leading the way. He spotted the enemy sitting and resting behind a bamboo clump. The enemy also saw us. Thea managed to fire first, spraying a burst of bullets into the bamboo clump, but since he was moving while firing, the dispersion was high. The rest of us also ran and fired in support. When we got there, they had run away, leaving only one dead body. We continued across the bridge and advanced towards the Phum Division 10 village. We didn't see any sign of the enemy. We continued along that road, advancing to another village. From the first few stilt houses in this village were also empty of the enemy. As we continued, splitting into 2 wings on both sides of the road, to search the next houses, we approached a stilt house near the edge of the forest and detected voices inside, including a woman's voice. Theo crept through the bushes and advanced first with us, supporting him from behind. When he was about 5 to 10 meters from the house, he suddenly stood up and emptied an entire belt from his RPD. We behind him also aimed at the house and opened fire. When we reached the house, we only heard groans and wheezing sounds. We rushed in and saw 4 dead enemy soldiers lying in various positions. Among them was a female Pol Pot soldier with a thigh wound who was moaning. We weren't interested in taking trophies as the Pol Pot forces were starving at that time. The spoils of war we collected were 2 guns, some ammunition, and a few dented, perforated pots. Our soldiers left 1 handful of packed rice, a soldier's midday meal, for the wounded female Pol Pot soldier. We turned towards the road to link up with the team on the other side of the road. Mission complete, we returned to the unit along that route. On the way back to the unit, we ran into a young Pol Pot teenage soldier. His only possession was a small pot. He looked terribly skinny and we felt sorry for him. He was walking on the road in the same direction as us, so we simply brought him along. When we reached the 8th Battalion, we rested in the battalion reconnaissance unit's quarters. After feeding the young Pol Pot soldier, we tested him. We unloaded the guns and asked him to perform the assembly and disassembly procedure. He executed it skillfully. That night we let him sleep inside the house with us without tying him up. Doan, a man from they been, even took pity on him and lent him a canvas tarp to lie on and wrap himself in to ward off mosquitoes. But our compassion was misplaced, and he gave us a nasty surprise. That night, because we were staying in the 8th Battalion headquarters area, the guards on duty neglected their posts. A sudden disappearance, and a lesson learned when we woke up in the morning, we were startled to find the young Pol Pot soldier was gone. His pot along with the tarp had also disappeared. Later, whenever we recalled that incident, we felt a chill. We were truly lucky he ran away. If he had managed to get his hands on a gun that night, things would have been different. Doan later consoled himself that he had given his tarp as a souvenir. That was a lifelong lesson for us when dealing with the enemy. The incident was not too serious, so we were left alone. When we returned to the unit to rest, the battalion reconnaissance teams had already returned to their respective units. A few days later, our 20th Company left only a small element behind, and the rest of us went on an independent sweeping mission for 2 days. During these independent days, the veteran soldiers mentored us in reading the map and carrying out field reconnaissance. 2 days of independent sweeping. On the first day, after sweeping through the forest in the afternoon while crossing a river, we noticed a very large cassava field on the opposite bank, but the cassava had already been harvested, leaving only a few leaf-thatched huts and the cassava stalks. We burned those huts and continued our march as planned. On the second day, we continued to search the villages and fields, but we didn't encounter any enemy. Our field study and sweep were complete. Preparing for a long mission one early morning, we received orders to go to logistics to receive rations, food, and weapons in preparation for a mission. This one was likely to be long, as everyone was issued a full rice sack, plus several bags of dried rice, a few packets of instant noodles. For food, each person received 1 can of chicken and a few cans of fish, plus some bouillon powder. Additionally, there were 2 packs of dried rations for reserve, and we didn't forget a few water purification tablets. After receiving all the supplies, we began our march to the 8th Battalion that afternoon. That evening, our commanding officer met with the 8th Battalion's command. It was then we learned that our mission this time would be to sweep and hunt for the mock. According to the newly received intelligence, he had 1 amputated leg, usually traveled by elephant, and was still lurking in the Lesh forest area. Early the next morning, we set out on our mission, according to the positions marked on the map. This time we were following the soldiers' motto of that era: go long, go deep, go far, go until the day you die. The hunt for the mock. This was the time of the transition between the 2 seasons, the dry and rainy, so the sky in the jungle was constantly dark and bright. Occasionally there were sudden but very heavy rain showers. Such downpours made marching miserable for our soldiers. Clothes were always soaked, coupled with sweat from long days of heavy carrying, making every soldier's uniform reek. At this time, soldiers' illnesses began to emerge. But there was also a bright side. After this trip, everyone became a guitar player, referring to scratching and itchy skin disease. One cloudy, foreboding day, signaling heavy rain, we stopped to set up rain covers and then continued our march. The vast, ancient Lesh forest was truly punishing our soldiers. Our reconnaissance team took turns leading the way. Then, quite unexpectedly, we were overjoyed to find fresh elephant footprints, still holding rainwater. We tried to march as fast as possible to follow, even though we didn't know if they were the tracks of a domestic or a wild elephant. So we followed the elephant tracks, but they seemed to get farther and farther away. Although we occasionally came across a few old fireplaces on the path, the rain had washed away all the ashes, leaving only charred pieces of wood, as if mocking us too late. Ambushes and booby traps. After a tiring and frustrating day with no results, we temporarily stopped to rest. The next day we didn't follow the elephant tracks, but went according to the planned route. We did discover old resting places of both our forces and the enemy, but they were long abandoned. We only found empty cigarette packets and rice husks. This was a dense, ancient forest where little sunlight could penetrate the thick canopy. While resting, we heard a flapping sound overhead, but no one knew what it was. Many soldiers said it was the sound of a hawk's wings. After a short rest, we continued our march.